All right, so I just wanted to welcome everyone. So thank you so much for showing up for our Meet the Expert series. Today we are going to be discussing college admissions process for amazing neurodivergent learners. If any of you have high schoolers, like especially seniors, I'm sure this topic is off the top of your mind. So before we get into it though, I'd like to share just a little bit about us and what we do. At Learnfully, we provide tech-enabled services for our neurodivergent learners, and we work to support all learners' executive functioning skills. We have the pleasure of supporting students who have diagnoses, and we also support students who do not have diagnoses or in that process. We really believe in unlocking learner potential through individualized education. All right, we'd like to preview the agenda. I'm a writing instructor. I always tell my students that we need to know where we're going before we start. So we're going to have an introduction. You're going to have the chance to meet Dr. Endlich. We're going to kind of talk about the college admissions process, and we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. All right, so Dr. Endlich, who's going to be joining us today, I'm really excited to introduce him. He's a clinical psychologist, an education college admissions expert. He assists neurodivergent students worldwide, which is really cool to see in the college world because usually it's very United States focused. I'm really excited to be able to bring in that perspective. He has a PhD in clinical psychology from Boston University. He's a professional writer and editor, as well as a neurodivergent parent and adult. As for me, I'm a neurodiverse adult and education specialist. I have a master's in education with a specialty in learning and teaching. I am an LGBTQ and ADHD advocate and a member of both communities. And I work primarily with middle and high school students. So when it comes to the college admissions process, I'm no stranger to it, especially when it comes to those essays, which are no one's favorite but my own. Everybody's having the worst time except for me. I love editing those.
Me too.
Yeah. So the importance of understanding the right fit, I just wanted to go over why this is so valuable. So that way, when we understand the admissions process and how complicated it is, it makes a little more sense. So I think like the first point of importance in terms of finding a fit would be success and confidence. So I always tell my students, like, you want to be challenged, but you also want to pick a school in which you can succeed. Lots of times when students pick like the absolute reach school, it might not be a school that they can succeed in. So it's finding that balance between challenge and success, especially if you plan on pursuing graduate education. Value alignment and community. If you're any of my students and parents, I've probably hammered your ears already with value alignment. But I would define it as like, ensuring that what you value is also seen in the institution and student body. For example, I always encourage my learners to find schools that are very collaborative as opposed to competitive. That would be value alignment. Positive outlook, which ties in a lot to the first point. You want to be challenged, but you also don't want to perform poorly. So it's important to have that positive relationship with academic progress. Also, it's essential to find a place in which that feels feasible. Safety and growth. You will grow a lot in college. I always say that like the freshman year of college is like personality boot camp. You sort of almost have that advanced version of growth. You really step into adulthood. So selecting a school that feels like a safe context for growth is really important. Exploring independence. College is a major step towards independence. And although independence looks different for all learners at different ability levels, there is definitely a degree of additional independence. So ensuring that the school that you're pursuing has similar supports that fit your needs and interests. All right, so what to expect? We're going to have an amazing presentation by Dr. Endlich. Yeah, okay, so the next two, I'm going to be a little bit more into teacher mode and caution on what not to do. I would encourage you all to not ask specific questions. More general questions about the admission process are super welcomed because that way when we answer them, we'll speak to more of you versus specific questions about a student's progress. Additionally, please keep your questions in the Zoom chat and we will be able to address them either at the end through our Q&A session or in our upcoming blog post about this webinar. All right, and I'll let Eric take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Giulia. I'm looking forward to chatting with you and hearing audience questions. I'm going to be moving things right along to hopefully leave a good amount of time for questions, but there's So much to talk about on the subject. I'm going to try to hit a lot of topics. Uh, I don't really like talking about myself, but I will briefly say, yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist by profession, worked many years in the mental health field, and loved working with teens. Also been writing my whole life. Actually sold my first story to a magazine when I was 13 to give you an idea of how long I've been a writer. Majored in English undergraduate. So I love the writing piece. I've always loved working with teens. I kind of discovered that being a college counselor was a way to combine all of my interests and my counseling expertise. And I love working with students who are neurodivergent, students with learning differences, emotional challenges, who might otherwise struggle through the process and to find the right fit in college and successfully transition to college. So we really like helping students with additional challenges in the transition application process and making a difference for them. So I think that kind of answers the question of why I do what I do. Okay, should we come back to this slide, or do you want me to say
Yeah, so I think
anything?
just to address, I think there's like two kinds of questions that we see the most from the audience. So there's the process and pre-work as well as the admissions process. Just so look out for those questions during Dr. Endlich's presentation. And if we don't get to them, we're going to return to this slide at the end as well, to see if that can spark some amazing live questions and answers.
Yeah, I think I'm going to hit a number of these points in the presentation, but if I miss some of them and there's still burning questions, happy to get to them. So I founded Top College Consultants. We're a nationwide team of folks working with students all over the country, as well as students in other countries, on the whole college admissions process. And that includes, of course, building the college list, getting the essays written, getting the Common App or other platforms like the UC app completed, and the other pieces that go along. You know, we happy to review resumes, help students prepare for admissions interviews, make sure that they're applying to colleges where they would maximize their chance of scholarships, if that's something that matters. I've even been involved in appealing financial aid offers successfully. And then often finding support programs, not only at college, but during the gap year and summer programs. And we're going to actually touch on those. And that was one of my real students, by the way. So I would love to hear from folks, you know, what year your child or children are in and what concerns you have about college and successfully transitioning to college. And I don't know that we'll get to all of your questions, but we'll hit as many as we have time for. I just want to say at the outset that although we specialize in helping students apply to college, I'm fully aware that college is not the only option or even the best option for everyone. Lots of students choose to take a gap year or a post-grad year. We'll come back to that topic briefly later on. You can go straight into the workforce. You can start your own business. Not only do high school grads start their own businesses, I see high school students in high school starting their own business. You can go to a trade school, learn a trade like plumbing, electrical, HVAC, go to a certificate program in IT or healthcare or other fields. You can go into the Peace Corps, which is a 2-year commitment, or AmeriCorps, which is like a domestic version of it for anywhere from 3 to 12 months. Obviously, the military, community college, and of course, the 4-year college. So certainly not going to go into all those options, but just want to be clear that there's loads of options in addition to college, which is what we're going to be focusing on, or 4-year colleges, so to speak. That being said, the more education you have, on average, the more money you're likely to earn across the board. Of course, people like to cite examples of billionaires who didn't finish college, but as a whole, people do tend to earn more as they go up in education. In addition to that, there's actually statistically live longer and have a lower risk of dementia. How exactly the causality runs, we're not sure, but interesting findings. Briefly talk about community college. What are the advantages of community college? Well, first of all, it tends to be the cheapest option. In some cases, in some states, it can be even free tuition. There's usually one near where you live. Sometimes students will just take one course or a couple of courses, so you can have that sort of slow start if you're not sure that you're ready for a full-time college course load. And, financially, if you need to work while you're in college, it's a good way to be able to work, and pay for college because it tends to be quite affordable. You can get an associate's degree. That's typically, in theory, a 2-year degree or longer if you're going part-time. You can also go to community college and get a certificate. Common certificate fields would be in information technology, computers, healthcare fields. But there's a variety depending on the community college. So you can get that certificate and go straight into the workforce, or you can get that associate's degree and then transfer to a 4-year college. Many states have these agreements. They're called articulation agreements, where you get a guaranteed transfer to a 4-year college, assuming you've met certain grade point average criteria. So we primarily work with high school students who are applying to 4-year colleges. We sometimes work with students applying to grad school or transferring colleges, but the bulk of what we work with is high school students. So that's what we're going to focus on. And so this is a challenging process for students in general, but it's even more challenging for our neurodivergent students. Recent survey of high school students across the country found that students reported that the college application process is the #1 most stressful academic experience they have in high school. That's kind of a sad statement. I wish it weren't the case, but there you go. Why is it so stressful? Well, #1, there's thousands of colleges in the US to choose from. So just figuring out where should I apply can be pretty challenging. Figuring out kind of what are all the options. If you need support because you are neurodivergent, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, another learning difference, figuring out what kind of support do I need and where can I find that support, and being okay with that. So sometimes parents or school staff recognize the student needs certain kinds of help in college, and the student may be resistant to that. They may say, I just want to try it without any accommodations or support and kind of see how it goes. So being okay with that and embracing that can be a challenge too. Getting the essays written, Julie and I, it's our favorite part of the work. If I could do only one thing, it would be the essays. A lot of fun for me, unfortunately, not so much fun for students. It's very different from the essays that they write in high school. The essays you write in high school, you can often go onto the internet and look up things and do your research. The essays you write for college are about you. You can't go online and research yourself. So there's a lot of self-reflection. There's a lot of that can be very anxiety provoking if this is unfamiliar to students. And kind of how do you organize it? The prompts that colleges provide are intentionally vague in some cases. So that can stress students out. Like, where do I start? What are they looking for? What does this mean? Some of our students have things that are sort of unusual on their transcripts. Maybe they didn't take a foreign language. Maybe they took a leave of absence or changed schools or have kind of an uneven pattern of grades. So how do you address that in your application? Do you disclose your diagnosis when you're applying? Do you take a standardized test? And if so, do you submit the scores? And getting everything done by those deadlines. Those are some of the challenges that our students face. So happens I polled parents recently, just in the past few weeks, and 50 parents of neurodivergent students say these are their top concerns in the college application process. #1, finding disability support or autism support in college. That's the biggest, the #1. #2 and #3 kind of tied, more or less, getting the essays done, figuring out where to apply. Those are the two big ticket items in the work that we do with students. Building that list, getting the essays done. Those are the two most time-consuming parts of the process. Managing time. Most of the students we work with struggle with executive functioning. Huge issue. We'll come back to that. And then just the total amount of work involved. When students are also in school, maybe they're on a sports team, maybe they're getting tutoring, maybe they're going to therapy or have a part-time job. This is another job on top of everything else, which is why ideally I like to work with students on getting their applications done in the summer before senior year, whenever possible. What about finding the colleges, building that college list? And by the way, the college behind me and in the pictures, these are real college pictures that I've taken on my college tours. That's University of San Diego on the screen. So figuring out, what location do you prefer? So these factors, a lot of these are the same factors that any other student, not just neurodivergent students, would consider. Where is it located? How much does it cost? How big is it? Does it offer the majors I want, the clubs or sports I'm interested in? The culture or vibe that I want as far as kind of the student body and the setting. Is it urban? Is it rural? Is it suburban? The one piece, the additional piece that's really key for our students is, does it offer the support, the disability support or learning support programs that I might need? And on our Top College Consultants website, that's topcollegeconsultants.com, we have a database of neurodiversity-friendly colleges, which colleges have support programs, neurodiversity clubs, and so on. And you can sort it by state. If you're wondering, well, which ones are near me, you can click on the state column and sort it. So ask parents again, 50 parents of neurodivergent students, what are the college selection factors that matter to you? And these were the top ones that came up, the majors that are offered. We really can't emphasize that enough, because often parents will ask, well, where are the good support programs and so on? Well, if your child wants to study aeronautical engineering or game design or cybersecurity or theater production or something that's somewhat specific, that's not going to be offered at every college. You've got to go where you can study what you want to study. Executive function support, this came up over and over and over again. The parents are really concerned about students going off to college and being able to project manage their time and the assignments and their life. We're going to come back to that again. The vibe or the culture, where will my kid fit in? Where will they make friends? What's going to sort of feel like their people? Key piece of key criterion. And then finally, the quality of disability services, not surprisingly. So let's talk about support. All colleges in the US, for all practical purposes, and I say all, 99% of the colleges are governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act, just like in the workplace, in many workplaces. So they have to provide disability accommodations, but that is the base level. So if you're on a college tour and you ask the admissions folks in that info session, hey, what can your college do for my kid who has ADHD? They're going to say, oh, we have a disability services office and we can provide all kinds of accommodations like extra time on tests and testing in a distraction-reduced environment and on and on and on. Keep in mind that is the base level that every college offers. That's not something special or unique. Some colleges do have an additional level where there are services available, such as academic coaching, which is basically the same thing as executive function coaching. And then a smaller number of colleges offer a more comprehensive learning support program with multiple components, not just academic coaching, but possibly peer mentors, maybe social events, maybe priority registration where students can register early, maybe an early move-in or pre-orientation in the summer. Whole suite of services. That's not typical, that's the exception. And often these programs cost additional, there's an additional fee associated with it. But I only talked about some ways to get support. We're going to talk about a variety of ways that your child can get support. But first, I want to talk about assessing whether your child is college ready, or if you're the student, whether you are college ready. I hope we have some students on. So if you are in high school and you are taking challenging courses, honors, AP, IB, dual enrollment, accelerated, and you are getting solid grades, there's a very good chance that you can handle college level academics and you'll be just fine, so to speak, with the level of difficulty in college. But that doesn't mean you're ready for college. Being ready for college means you can handle the independence of being in college, of not having your parents there to wake you up and make sure you go to class and take your medication and make your appointments and get your medication refilled and all the other things that you need to do in college. So a lot that parents may be doing or professionals may be doing in high school that now gets shifted to the student. Another definition of college readiness, this is from Jake Weld at Mansfield Hall. Sorry, got cut off at the bottom. I did mean to give him credit. I like this definition. which is that students need to independently identify when they need help in any area, not just in class, emotionally, socially, whatever, healthcare. Students need to figure that out because their parents aren't there to see that they're struggling. Students need to be able to independently seek out services. That means make that appointment in the health center or the tutoring center, whatever the case may be. Even if they run into obstacles. So you went on the website and it wasn't working, or you left a voicemail and it didn't get returned. You got to persist and go down to that tutoring center or whatever, and figure out how to get those services, even if you run into obstacles. And then finally, once you've got those services, you need to be able to apply those. So if you've met with a tutor or an executive function coach and gotten all these great tips, you've got to apply that. And if you can do all that independently, you're in great shape to succeed in college. College is very different from high school. Those of you who have already been to college know that. I'm just going to highlight a few key differences. In high school, the day tends to be very structured with a long day of school, often followed by other structured activities like band practice or sports practice or tutoring, test prep, homework. Few hours of homework, lots of support. The support tends to be built in high school. Students just show up in high school and those supports and services are delivered. They don't have to really advocate a whole lot because the services are just kind of brought to them. And the law that applies in high school is different from the ADA, which applies in college. High schools, the public school district has an obligation to make sure your child succeeds, that they make effective progress in school. The ADA, which is the law that applies in college, just guarantees that students have access to the curriculum through accommodations, perhaps, to make sure that they can access the curriculum. But whether they take advantage of those accommodations and actually succeed, that's on the student. So a different mindset because it's a different law. In college, again, as many of you may already know, relatively few hours in class, typically more assignments, more pages of reading, longer papers. Your time is less structured. You may have one or more days a week when you've got no classes at all, and you've got the whole day to figure out, am I just going to sleep? Am I going to play video games? Or am I going to, stay on top of my assignments and make sure I don't fall behind? And there are lots of services and supports available in college. We've touched on some of them, but it is up to the student to go out there and get them. Nobody is knocking on their door saying, hey, have you been to the career center? Have you been to the writing center or the tutoring center? It's there if you want it, but nobody's going to force it on you. Again, going back to the parents survey, 50 parents said these are their top concerns. Keeping up with the workload in college. Is my kid going to be able to keep up? Are they going to make friends? Are they going to ask for help when they need it? That is the self-advocacy. Can they manage their time? Can they manage their mental health? This is increasingly a huge concern. I did a whole presentation earlier this week on anxiety in college. And then also, are they going to apply for accommodations and manage their social media use so that they can, that's part of time management, of course. What are the most important skills? I'm not going to go into great detail. I've written articles on this. So you can see, lots of links on our website. I break it down to 3 areas. Number one, do you know your strengths and your challenges? Not just what classes you do well in and which ones are harder for you, but emotionally, what are your vulnerabilities? Socially, what are you going to need help with so that you seek those helps and that help and those supports in college? Can you advocate? Can you proactively seek out resources when you need it? Can you schedule appointments when you need them? Get yourself to appointments because nobody is really monitoring you to make sure that happens. And then can you manage your time? Keep up your level of motivation because that semester may seem like a long time to get all those. You may have long time horizons for assignments. Can you keep your motivation high? Manage your emotional reactions to situations like disappointments and your habits. Can you keep your social media use or your gaming use or your substance use in check so that you don't get into unhealthy habits? So one way to address these skills is to work on them while you're still in high school. There may be resources at school, like a school counselor. You might hire a private therapist or an executive function coach to help you work on these skills in high school. That is assuming you're not a senior now, but you're earlier on in high school and you have some time. We love to work with students when they're 9th and 10th grade because we've got a lot of time to make sure they build these skills. And then there might be courses like personal finance available at your high school that could help you build some life skills. I hope so. It's a great course. My daughter took it when she was in high school. Second option, in addition to building the skills in high school, build them between high school and college. Take a year to work on these skills. Now, during a gap year, you can do practically anything. You can travel the world, you can get a job, start a business, do an independent project, do community service, and use that time to mature. Your brain is maturing. The part of your brain that manages executive functioning will continue to develop well into your mid to late 20s. So one more year, you'll be a little bit more able to manage your time and organization. But there are college readiness programs specifically for neurodivergent students. I did a whole panel discussion of those, and you can find the link to the YouTube video on our website. So there are programs specifically for helping students get ready for college. Some of these programs may just be a summer program, might be a 3-week program, and some of them are year-long programs during that gap year. And they help students work on these skills. Third option, well, what if you don't want to take a gap year and you're already finished with high school or practically finished? You can still work on the skills in college. So don't feel like you have to have everything mastered and 100% figured out before you start college. Get the support you need in college to succeed. That could be through a learning support program, which I'll say more about in a minute. That could be through a wellness community. So there are colleges that have living learning communities. That could be like a separate floor on a residence hall or an entirely separate residence hall where the focus is on wellness, being substance-free, staying physically active, eating healthy, etc. You can get counseling in college. Most colleges I know offer free mental health counseling. Go to your academic advisor, go to the career center, get tutoring. There's usually free peer tutoring available, sometimes paid tutoring available. I mentioned learning support programs. Again, many of these are at an additional cost. If you go to the list on our website, the database, you'll see what the actual cost is. Some of them do not charge extra for the program, but many of them do. If it's part of the college, then it's going to be sort of coordinated with the college. The people work at the college. They know how the course registration process works and so on. If it's an autism support program, there's probably going to be a social component like social activities or social skills workshops. Some programs are just for the first year, but most of them allow you the option of continuing to get support throughout college. Another option is to go to a college that specializes in students with learning differences. There's only 2 in the country, Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, and Landmark College in Putney, Vermont. I've been to both of them. They are a great option for the right student, but they are not right for every student. They're small, they're in sort of small town settings, but because all the students are neurodivergent, students are going to feel accepted and welcomed. It's a very kind of accommodating atmosphere, and the support is sort of baked into the whole college. It isn't this sort of pull out separate program. If it's not the right college for your child, keep in mind that they have summer programs and transition programs. So there are other services that they offer, even if you feel like it's not the right place for college for me or my student. And then one other option I want to mention is you can be in college and get your support from somewhere outside of the college. That could just be hiring your own private executive function coach. I know lots of folks who do this. We actually offer academic coaching ourselves, but I know many people around the country who are great at this. Could be getting a private therapist or a prescriber for medication. But there are also comprehensive learning support programs that are independent. They're run by separate companies. Some of them are non-residential, where you go to college and you just access that program separately. They may come to you at your college, depending on the program. And then there are some that are residential, where you actually live at the program and attend a nearby college. And there's a few of these around the country. We are well acquainted with them. I'm going to be touring another one this month, but they are very expensive. It's probably the single most expensive option of all the options I mentioned. Bottom line is know the resources. Know not just the learning support program and disability services, but accessing faculty. I'm not going to go through the list, but I've mentioned some of these before. Clubs, a lot of colleges have clubs with a mental health focus. Active Minds is a nationwide sort of chain of these clubs. And increasingly, students are starting their own neurodiversity clubs. I want to have other students that I can talk to who know what it feels like to be marginalized or bullied or excluded. And we can kind of pool our strength and support each other and so on. There's, RAs in the residence hall. You can form your own study groups. Lots and lots of ways to get support in college. I wish I had accessed more of these when I was in college. I did not. I feel like I kind of missed the boat with some of this. We asked parents, again, 50 parents, what do you think are the most important resources? Number one, Disability Services Center. Number two, academic coaching. That's, again, like executive function coaching, autism support program, academic advising, clubs, tutoring, social events, and office hours. So interesting that the top three basically involve disability support, learning support, autism support. And a few quick tips before we move on to questions. People say, when should I reach out to disability services? When I say early, I mean during the college search process, when you are touring colleges. Sorry about the double image, I just saw that. So when you're touring colleges, that is the time to have a separate meeting with disability services and learn more about what they have to offer. I have an article on our website on what are the questions to ask Disability Services Center, in case you're wondering, like, what should I ask when I meet with them? So learn about the services and accommodations. This question comes up a lot. Disclosure. Do I disclose disability or diagnosis during the application process? You don't have to. It is entirely optional. They don't ask you. They won't ask you when you're applying. Some colleges that have programs might ask, are you interested in applying to this program? It's not a trick question. They are literally just wanting to know if you need to fill out an application for that program. But you don't have to disclose. It is entirely voluntary. There's no reason to think across the board that it's going to help you. There's no special quota for students with disabilities or neurodivergent students. But there's no reason to think it's going to hurt you either. They can't discriminate against you. That would be illegal. Not to say that people don't break the law, but there's no reason to assume that they would discriminate. If there is something on the application that needs explanation, that disclosure would help with explanation, then it could actually work to your benefit to disclose. So maybe you didn't take any foreign languages because you had a disability waiver in high school so that you didn't have to take a foreign language. Maybe you switched high schools because you needed to get more support. Maybe you went on ADHD medication, you got diagnosed and your grades went up. There might be something on the application in your transcript or in your story that would benefit from explanation. But this is, again, voluntary. I do have quite a few students every year who want to talk about disability, want to talk about their diagnosis, their neurodivergence in their essay. That is their choice. But some students feel passionately, this is my story, this is a central part of who I am, and so I want to share that. That's totally fine, and students who've done that have done very well. A couple of students from last year who did that. One of them is at MIT this year, another one's at Wesleyan University. So some, pretty tough to get into colleges. And then current documentation of your diagnosis. We can go into more detail about that if you want. What type of documentation you need for disability accommodations, that's going to vary depending on the college. So college websites should tell you what you need, but that there isn't one standard. Anybody who tells you that your IEP or 504 plan carries over or rolls over into college is sadly mistaken. They do not carry over. So no matter what you have approved in high school, there's no guarantee that you will get that in college. You might, with the appropriate documentation, you might even get more accommodations than you got in high school, but it's not a guarantee. And finally, think about college readiness programs, gap year options. I'm going to skip through standardized testing because I want to leave plenty of time for questions. Most colleges are test optional these days, or even some are test free, like the public universities in California. If you do take a test and you get a good score, good being relative to each college, then you can submit it if it's going to help you. If you're applying test optional and your score isn't going to help you, don't submit your score. And there's a good chance if you get extra time on tests in high school that you can apply for extra time on the SAT or ACT. So in summary, think about college readiness, work on those skills as soon as you can, make a plan to get the support in college. I co-lead a group of 12,000, almost 13,000 this week. A group of parents of neurodivergent students who are college bound is a great place for parents to get support from each other, to ask questions. Has anybody had a kid go to this college? Has anybody gone to this summer program or this camp? Anybody have any ideas for this situation that I'm dealing with? So a great place to get support and information from other parents. Here's some links if you get the slides to all the stuff you can find on the Top College Consultants website. So you don't have to write any of this down. You can find all these links on the website, an article about disclosure, our database that I mentioned, a webinar on gap year programs, and so on. And now let's move on to questions. And do you want me to leave the slide up or should I stop sharing?
I think we can leave this slide up. So I think
Okay.
we're going to start with some specific questions. So these were general top questions. I do think a lot of them were kind of touched on through your presentation, which is amazing. So just like shout out to everyone in the audience though, because we got tons of like live questions, which are always like really exciting to see come in. So we had a question. So someone was wondering if when you were discussing independence, if any kids are at the independence level, I think, college capable versus college able, I believe. This person said that the kids that they see coming into college as a professor have a lot of skills that are still in the process of being worked on, partly because of the learning setbacks caused by the pandemic. So they were wondering if the goalposts that you described, college capable and college ready, that's what it was, are reasonable goalposts. Or if instead we should just encourage folks to be aware of the signs that they might need help or growth in this area, or if there's an in-between.
Yeah, that's a good observation and an interesting point. Unfortunately, college is still the same thing that it was before the pandemic for the most part. Sure, during the pandemic, some of it went virtual, much to the chagrin of many parents, many students. But college is pretty much the same animal by and large that it was before the pandemic. So you still have to be just as independent, doing your laundry, getting yourself up for class, keeping track of your assignments. So since the demands haven't really changed, I think the skills required are still the same. But again, there's various ways to acquire those skills and various points that you can work on them. Should professors and others be more understanding about that? Yeah, it would be great if everyone could understand that this is a unique point in history where kids did miss out on a lot because of the pandemic.
Absolutely. And I noticed that during your presentation, you had a point where you said, like, you can wait or you can just kind of go for it and right and learn as like hone those skills in college. And I think that sort of speaks to like, when these goalposts, like maybe you're not quite there, but when, like you said, when these institutions are still moving in that pace, sometimes it's a little bit of like, okay, let's go swim and see what's out there. So would you recommend that approach or would you kind of maybe be a little more hesitant towards that?
Well, I recommend knowing in advance whether you're ready or not.
Yeah.
So some students do these pre-college programs while they're still in high school. It is
Mhm.
not required, and it doesn't give you an edge in college admissions to go and do a 3-week engineering program or a drama program or what have you. I do see lots of students do them. Many of them really enjoy these programs, but it's a little bit of a taste of college. So if you go off for 3 weeks and it's a great experience, then that's a good sign that you're on the right track. Or if you've done overnight camp and you've been away from your family for weeks. But I can't tell you how many students I've met, high school students, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, who have never been away from home. They've never been apart from their parents, and they're completely sure that they can go across the country and be just fine with nothing to base that on.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues likes to ask parents, hey, if you, the parents, were to take off for a vacation and go to Hawaii for a week or something and leave your kid during the school year when they still had to go to school, how
Mhm.
would they be? Would they get themselves to class? Would they do their homework? Would they feed themselves and go to sleep, on time? And if you as a parent can say, yeah, I think my kid would be okay. We've been away overnight, or
Mhm.
they've gone away on various programs or what have you, then okay, that's a good sign.
All
So
right.
I would want to know. I wouldn't want to just chance it.
Sure. So like maybe understanding the circumstance a little bit more and evaluating that readiness before taking the plunge for sure.
Yeah,
So
and I fully realize, these programs I refer to can be expensive. And not all families can afford them. I'm not saying everyone should just start shelling out money for them, but it's one way to test the waters. It's not the only way. Sometimes kids go off and stay with grandparents or something.
Mhm. For sure. And then our second question, so like it's about sort of the college search process. So many schools claim to provide resources and programs, especially the ones you mentioned. So where can parents ask and look, what resources can they use to validate the effectiveness and the reality of these programs? This particular parent has learned from others that it can be a little bit misleading to just sort of take the school's word for it. So where can they find some information to validate what's being expressed by the school?
Yeah, well, first of all, not all programs are the same. Just because a program says it,
Mhm.
one of the things to look at is how many hours of service is. Is it 30 minutes a week maximum of academic coaching, or is it 2 or 3 sessions a week of academic coaching? So look at not just what are the components of the program, but what are kind of the total number of hours of support in the program.
Mhm.
Number two, ask other parents. As I said, in our Facebook group of 12,000 or almost 13,000 parents, this comes up all the time. Has anybody's kid gone to this college, and what was your experience? What did they think of the program? Um, so talk to other families. Thirdly, some colleges, some programs do keep data actually. So you can ask, one of the questions you can ask them is, do you keep outcome data? Do you have any statistics on, your success rate? So one program that comes to mind that I went to in New York City a while back, they said that the graduation rate and the GPAs for their students, the neurodivergent students in the program, had better outcomes than the students in the university as a whole. So they were not only sort of successful by neurodivergent standards, they were actually doing better than their neurotypical peers. So I thought that was a good thing to know.
That's a very good thing to know. And then speaking of, you touched on that Facebook group, which is like amazing that you have like 12,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Could you remind me the name of that program? So,
Sure, it's parents of college-bound students with ADHD, with learning disabilities, ADHD and ASD.
all right, that
I
sounds like
can put the link in the chat, but I'm sharing my screen, so I don't want to be clicking around right
I'll
now.
make sure that's in the webinar that we're going to put out. So the next question is about the application process as well. And it's how to approach just like the essay and application process if a student is not inclined to disclose their disability to address a possible transcript irregularity and is overall a little bit more of a private person when it comes to sharing those topics that we usually see on personal statements.
Can you repeat that? I'm not sure I quite follow. So the student doesn't want to disclose,
A
but there
disability.
are,
It's sort of let's we can break that down into I think like two questions. So the first question would be, right, like if a student has some transcript irregularities and does not want to disclose their disability, which might have involved those irregularities, what is a different way that they can approach the admissions process without disclosing? Or what would you recommend? Would you recommend?
Yeah, well, you can just apply and hope for the best. I don't know of an
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know of another way. On the Common App, you scroll
Mm-hmm.
down to the very end of the Common App, there's a couple of questions. One of them we call the additional information section. It's essentially an open-ended question. It's ask you, is there anything else you want to share? And that's a great place to say, oh, yes. And you could share any number of things. You can share a link to your resume or a YouTube channel that you've created. You can
Mm-hmm.
share some activities that you didn't have space to include. But you can also share, I didn't take any foreign languages because I had a disability waiver, or I changed schools because I needed more support, or, because I was getting bullied at the last school, whatever. There's a lot of stuff you can put in there. That actually, the school change goes, there's another spot for that too. But
Mm-hmm.
um, so, if you're applying to a school that admits A students and you're a C student, you're probably not going to get in no matter what you say. Just because you have a disability doesn't give you sort of a free pass to not meet the standards of the college. But there's always that gray area, people who almost meet it, but there's a couple of things that um, don't quite match what they're looking for. And that's where disclosure can sometimes be a game changer. So
Absolutely.
it can help the student if they don't want to disclose it. Most
Mm-hmm.
students are not disclosing and they're still getting into college. So it's not going to keep you from getting to college. But if there's something
Mm-hmm.
that is concerning to an admissions reader and you don't explain it, you might lose out on some opportunities.
Absolutely. And then I think the next part of that question is something that I think we both love. So how do you encourage students? So if you're a private person and you're struggling, maybe getting a little bit of that more like emotional depth and a little bit more of that identity focus in your personal statement, what are some ways that the student, let's say, like instead of writing a more surface level essay, how can someone encourage a student like this to feel more comfortable knowing themselves and writing themselves in their essays?
Yeah, I love that question. Uh, you know, it's a process. We just have conversations. It's a dialogue of reflecting on, well, so you say you want to write about, let's say, the student's autistic. You say you want to share that. Well, how has it impacted your life? What do you see as the ways in which that is a strength? What are the ways in which you've had challenges that you've then kind of worked through? So we have that dialogue just to get the student thinking. And that's true for any topic. Student says, oh, I love history. I want to write about history for
Mhm.
my essay. Okay, well, say more about that.
Yeah.
What can you say about it that's sort of intriguing and engaging, that's going to make the reader want to read more? And as you said, it's getting below the surface level. It's getting to what makes you unique. What's
Hmm.
special about your story? Tell me some stories. Tell me, what are some of your earliest memories, whatever the topic is. So, like for the history example, I say that because I have a lot of students interested in history. When did you become interested in history? And frequently the student will say, well, there was this fourth grade teacher
Hmm.
that just was so captivating, or I watched this documentary and that just like grabbed my attention. Okay, well, that's a place to start. It's an interesting personal story about you. It isn't
Hmm.
just like, I think history is important because blah blah blah. You don't want to say these generic things. You want to say things that are personal and specific to you.
That's amazing. And one thing I always like when I notice I get an essay that might seem a little bit more on the surface essay, like another question that you could ask a student like this is like, why did you choose to share this story? What is significant about this story? Or like again, starting with an interest, especially for those who might be more hesitant to share, starting with an interest and asking them why it's interesting to them and how it ties into what they value and their value system can lead to a really enriching essay. That's wonderful. And our next question would just be regarding like how would you recommend a student talk about their experience if they were in residential treatment? And this would be during high school.
Mhm. Yeah, that's. I would start with the question of if. Is that something that you're going to
Yeah.
disclose?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something you have to disclose because there was a break in your transcript, you took a leave of absence, you kind of have to explain. You don't have to share any more information than you want to. So if you're like, hey, I was in residential treatment for an eating disorder or a substance abuse condition, and I don't know that I necessarily want to share that, but don't I have to explain where I was for 6 months? You can say, I had to take time off of high school for medical treatment or a health condition or something sort of generic. Which has now been successfully treated. And as you can see, in junior year, I did great, and I'm, looking forward to college. So you can give the bare minimum of details. If you are going to go into more detail, and I've had students write about eating disorders and other things, the devil's in the details. It's all about how you frame it, that you want to sort of show an arc and some progress. You don't want to scare off colleges into thinking you're going to have a relapse and that you're going to take a leave of absence in college. That may be the case. I have students with chronic health conditions who might have to take leaves in college. I don't know. But you don't need to put that on their radar screen if you can avoid it. Because they don't want, high risk students that may not graduate or that may use up, a huge amount of resources.
Which is, I think, like another moment in which it's difficult working. I think writing these essays that can be so tender and personal, but then also remembering that they are going directly to these large institutions. So absolutely keeping that in mind. I have lots of students that write about mental health, but I always encourage them to like kind of put their perspective too, and like why it's important, what they learned and how they grew, maybe more so than the experience themselves. Right? So that way it would fit more into a Common App statement without, like you said, possibly raising those questions from the institution.
And this is one of those areas where social media can be a little, dangerous because people say, oh, I've heard from other parents, you shouldn't write about mental health, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do that. Be very careful about these sweeping generalizations.
Of course.
There's nothing wrong with writing about mental health per se, but it's again, how you write about it. And I've had students where the first draft of the essay is like, whoa, you probably don't want to say that to a college. That's not going to be the kind of thing that it's not going to be music to their ears. It may be true, and I admire your honesty and that you're willing to be very vulnerable. I truly admire that in students. But we often work through multiple drafts before they're still sharing their truth. They're still sharing their story and their journey, but in a way that is going to work to their advantage in the same way that you would in a job interview.
Of course. I really like that connection to job interview, because I do think when we start writing these narratives, especially when you have 650 words to talk about yourself, I think it is easy to kind of lose focus as to what it is and what it's for. I tell my students it's like you are kind of building a lock, that a key that fits into a certain lock. So just remembering its intention.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're trying to get into college.
Absolutely. There's a little bit of strategy. I know it's the kind of uneasy balance between strategy and like genuine emotional authenticity that sometimes it can be a little awkward. All right. So our next question sounds like it was written by my dad. So the concerns, this one says concerns about taking a gap year and losing momentum. So just in general, so there's two parts. So first, just talking about like, do you think gap years could possibly, I don't know, alter the momentum that one might have when they're fresh out of high school?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a common concern. There are lots of concerns about gap years. I do have an article about gap years, the advantages of gap years on the website. So the flip side is students can get burned out in high school. By the time students get to 12th grade, they've been in school for 12, 13 plus years. A lot of students want a break at that point, and to go straight into college for another 4 years, they might get burnt out in college. Whereas if they take a break and they kind of reset, and whether it's traveling the world or getting a job or whatever, and kind of finding themselves, figuring out their values and goals, they may be much more fresh and ready for college when they start than if they hadn't taken a gap year. So that's sort of the counterpoint to that. Studies suggest that students who take gap years do better. They get higher grades and have better graduation rates in college than their peers.
Mhm.
It's not a controlled experiment, so got to take it with a grain of salt, but that's what studies suggest. And it is compelling enough that there are colleges that are actually throwing money at students to take a gap year. Not a lot, but there are a few colleges that offer students money if they'll take a gap year. Amazing, but true.
Mhm.
So clearly and these are some good colleges have recognized that it's valuable. If a student takes a gap year and then they don't want to go to college, well, maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they're not meant to go to college. If you can't stay interested for that year, would you have stayed interested for 4 years when you're in college?
I really appreciate that perspective. And then I think also, like, what is a way, let's say a student does take a gap year, what is a way to sort of encourage them to keep up that momentum? Because I know, like, again, like that lack of structure. I know, like, for lots of neurodivergent folks, right, not having that external pressure of working again, like having deadlines, how would you recommend they stay interested and motivated and exercise that academic brain without the structure of being in school?
Yeah, well, you know, what a student needs depends on the individual student.
Mhm.
But to be clear, and again, a gap year doesn't mean a gap year program. It could
Mhm.
be, in theory, a gap year could just be staying on the couch and watching TV, although obviously I wouldn't recommend that. Um, but there are structured programs that have an academic component. So I have a student who did a gap year last year at a university, took a couple of courses, lived on campus, loved it. And there are some other colleges that have post-grad or gap year programs on campuses. There are also post-grad programs at private high schools, some of them being high schools for students with learning differences. So there are some structured PG or gap year programs that have an academic component that are helping students be more ready for college rather than, slacking off and losing their skills, actually helping them ramp up their skills.
I get
So
that.
that structure, I think, having a structure, whatever it is important. Sometimes people say, well, I'll take a gap year and I'll work and I'll take some community college courses. That's a little tricky
Yeah.
because you've got to check out with your college if you can do that. In many cases, that's not permissible. You can't be earning credits on your own. You may be able to earn them as part of a gap year program, but if you're they don't want you to be in college when you're not supposed to be in college, so to speak.
Of course. And then our last question is just like the tail end of that question. So this is more of a technical question. So can you apply or get accepted to a university and then take the gap year after you've received your admission?
Yeah, that's an easy one and an excellent one. Yes, and by all means, I always encourage students, if at all possible, to apply in senior year, just like their peers, apply to college, even if you are absolutely intending to take a gap year, and then defer. You accept it and say, yes, thank you. I'm so honored that you accepted me. I will be attending, but not next fall, a year from the fall.
Mhm.
And you have to request, they have to approve the deferral. Uh, Most colleges don't have a problem with it. There's, I think, a handful that are not as flexible about that. You can, do your research about that in advance, or maybe you don't go to that college if they're not willing to accept your deferral.
Accommodate you. And I do know
But
it
yeah, because then you've sort of have the best of both worlds at that point. You now have that whole year to do whatever it is you're going to do, save money, make money, work on your skills, but you've already got that college admission. And if you change your mind during that year, you know what? My career is taking off. I don't need to go to college. Or, I discovered it during this year. I'm actually interested in something else. So I need to go to a different college that has that major. Okay, you can change your mind, but you've
Mhm.
got that, fallback, so to speak.
That's amazing. All right. And then we'll just go to that next slide. Some contact information. All right. So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. I really, really, again, like really kind of blown away by the amount of engagement. That's super cool. If there were any questions that kind of remained unanswered, they will be answered in our webinar, which will be coming soon. This is how you can reach us. And I believe on the next slide, we have some information on how you can reach Eric and his amazing team at Top College Consultants. All right. So
Thank you.
just thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks, Learnfully, for having me. Thanks, Giulia. And thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Of
Hope it
course.
was helpful.
Yeah, we hope to see you. We hope to see you in the future for this series. Thank you so much.